Welcome, Bronco Nation, to another exciting video. As you can all see, I have another special guest on today. He's a guest that I've been wanting to bring on the channel since I started doing the channel about 4 years ago. It's someone who should be very much familiar to all of you, someone who was a former athletic director at Boise State, helped guide the program through its early years, is greatly responsible for a lot of the success Boise State has today. Of course, inventor of the famous blue turf at Boise State. Of course, I'm speaking about Gene Bleymaier. To me, he's very familiar because he is my uncle. It's an exciting opportunity to have Gene Bleymaier on the show today. He's a former Bora High School star, so a local native. Went to UCLA where he played tight end. He was 13 Pac-8 in 1974. Ended up finding his way to Boise State as the athletic director in 1981 before taking over full athletic duties in 1982, where he held the post until 2011. Thank you so much for coming on today, Uncle Gene.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you, Jacob.
Well, today we're going to talk about just really your journey as an athletic director at Boise State. This is a chance for us to look back at the past of Boise State and how we got to where we are today. Of course, we're in a very exciting time for the program. A lot of things happening with the basketball program, of course, just finishing out in the NCAA tournament. Unfortunately, not winning that game, but getting to the NCAA tournament, which was a big win for the program. The football team doing some very exciting things. It's an exciting time to be a Boise State fan. Athletic director Jeremiah Dickey's doing a fantastic job with the program. But this is a great chance before we start looking ahead to previewing the 2023 season, which I will be doing, bringing on former football players just like I did last year to talk about that. This is a chance for us to look back a little bit about Boise State's past and see how we got to where we are today. We're going to talk, of course, about the blue, how that came to be, the impact of that. Jeremiah Dickey has said that's Boise State's greatest marketing tool, and it's had a huge impact on Boise State's success both in the past and in the present. We'll talk about Boise State's jump to the FBS. We'll talk about conference realignment. Of course, that's a discussion point that happens in college football very much today, but it is not new to the college football world. Boise State saw its fair share of it back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then just talk about some of the coaches that came through the program and some of the impact that they had. It's going to be a great discussion. I look forward to it. And we'll just jump right into it then. So the blue was introduced there in 1986. But before we start talking about specifically about the blue, how did you come to be the athletic director at Boise State? Talk a little bit about that journey and moving up into being the athletic director there full-time in 1982.
All right. Well, when I graduated from UCLA, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And I had some friends that were going to law school. And so that seemed like, why not do that? I ended up going to Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. And after my second year of law school, I was still living in near UCLA and living with some guys that were still affiliated with the athletic program there at UCLA. And they knew I didn't really want to practice law full time when I finished. And so they said I ought to go talk to a couple of the administrators in the UCLA athletic department about opportunities. So I went in and talked with them, and they said, we're looking for an academic advisor for the athletic department. They never had one before. That was kind of a new field across the country. And they said, with your background, you might be a good fit. And that sounded intriguing to me. And so I looked at the law school schedule, and fortunately, Loyola had a night program. So there were a lot of people that were working full time in the day and then going to school at night. So my third year of law school, I decided to do that at night. I went to work at UCLA as the academic counselor for the athletic department. So eventually I took on more and more responsibilities at UCLA, and I was there for 5 years and enjoyed it. Everything was great. But my wife and I had only been married a couple of years. We were living in West LA, which was very expensive and still is. And I told my wife that, hey, I think I'd like to move to Boise. So I started looking at opportunities in Boise. And actually I secured a position in December to start the following June or July to be a clerk for a federal judge, and let's plan on moving. So that spring we were getting ready to go, and a friend of my dad's here in Boise called me and said, hey, Lyle Smith, the longtime athletic director, who had been at Boise State for 30, 40 years as the football coach and then as the athletic director, is retiring. And for the first time in forever, Boise State's going to be looking for a new athletic director. He said, you ought to apply. And, I laughed and I said, well, I'm 27 years old. I mean, what? They're not going to hire me as the athletic director. And he said, well, what do you have to lose? And I said, well, nothing. That's a good point. I don't have anything to lose. So I said, well, maybe I'll apply and hope to get an interview. Maybe I'll meet some people, and when I finish being the clerk, maybe I could get on there afterwards. So I went ahead and applied. Never in my wildest dreams expecting to be hired. And true to form, I wasn't. They hired a guy named Mike Mullally from Cal State Fullerton to be the athletic director. But because I had applied, the vice president at the time, Dr. Bullington, who was leading the search, he mentioned to the new athletic director, he said, hey, you're going to need to hire an assistant athletic director, and you might want to take a look at this guy. And he handed him my resume. And so, Mike was down at Cal State Fullerton. I was at UCLA. It's only a 45-minute drive. And so he called me and said, hey, would you be interested in being my assistant? And he goes, I know, that's a tough question because you applied to be the athletic director, and this might feel weird to you to work for me. And I laughed. I said, absolutely not. I said, Mike, I'm moving to Boise whether I get this job or not. So I didn't expect to get the job. I was just hoping to meet some people. And so he said, well, why don't you come down? Can you drive down after work today? And I said, sure, I'll head down there. And he and I talked for about 2.5 hours. And when we finished, he said, hey, the job's yours. And so I drove home and I told my wife, I said, hey, now we have 2 jobs in Boise. And she said, well, what are you going to do about the judge? And I said, hey, the judge can hire 100 people tomorrow for that position. I'm not hanging him out to dry at all. I said, he won't have any problem hiring a clerk for a federal judge. So that's how it happened. So we came up July 1981. I started as the assistant athletic director at Boise State with Mike Mullally, and had a ton to learn, obviously, but was in Boise where we wanted to be. And we had a one child at the time. She's 1 year old. And 7 months later, Mike got let go, unfortunately. And the president came to me and said, hey, I want you to be the athletic director. So this was in early 1982. And I was 28 at the time. That's how I got there, very unexpectedly, but was in a field that I enjoyed in athletics, and I'm doing it where I wanted to do it, which was in Boise.
See, you're at that point, you're only a couple of years older than I am right now, and you're running Boise State. And of course, it wasn't the Boise State that we all know today, but you're looking there at ways that you can make it that. You're trying to build towards the future. And along comes this idea, which has become iconic in not just Boise State history, but college football history. How did that idea come to fruition? Of course, I'm talking about the blue field. I know this is a story you've told dozens of, if not hundreds of times, but how did you think of the blue turf? What was the impact of that? And just how did it all come to be?
Well, so I started as the AD in 82, and then now it was 1985, 86. And we needed to replace the green AstroTurf field at Boise State. And this was about, I think, the third time that they had replaced the turf since it was put in. And the fields usually last about 8 years. And so we started looking at replacement fields and that whole process, planning on that summer of 1986, replacing the turf. And so I was actually in an airplane when this idea first germinated. And I was sitting in the plane just thinking about replacing the turf, and the fact that at the time we were going to spend $750,000 to take out a green field and put in a new green field. And nobody was going to care. Nobody was going to notice. And it was just going to be, business as usual. And that bothered me because I had never spent that much money before. And if I spend that much money, I want people to notice and realize that we did something different. So sitting on the airplane, and I was going, well, there's really no reason that it's green because people know it's not grass. So we're not going to fool people by putting in a green field. Why don't we try to give ourselves a home field advantage and do something in our school colors? And when I was at UCLA, we had the opportunity to play at some big places around the country. And when you went to Tennessee, everything was orange, everything. And when you went to Nebraska, everything was red. And I mean, everything. And that can be intimidating to a visiting team when they come in, at 5 o'clock on a Friday evening. They do a walkthrough at the stadium, and the next day at 1 o'clock, you're teeing it up and everything's red or orange. So I said, well, why not do it in our school colors? And so that's when the idea first came about. Now, I knew that it was a wild idea, no question. And I knew that people would think we were crazy or I was crazy. And so I couldn't tell anybody. I mean, I had to keep this to myself, but I knew I couldn't do it without getting the permission, obviously, of the president. And so after a couple of weeks, I got up the nerve to ask the president if I could meet with him. And he said, sure, come on over. And it was Dr. John Kaiser, a wonderful man, great president. And I said, hey, Doc, I got a crazy idea. And I said, I know it's a crazy idea, but I'd just like you to hear me out. And you don't have to say anything today. I don't want a response today. I'd like you to just think about it, and then we can talk about it, in a few days. And so I laid it out for him, and he, stayed quiet like I asked, and he said, "Okay, give me some time to think about it." And I said, "Okay." And I go, "But Doc, you understand, you cannot tell anybody. If this gets out, it'll just get blown out of the water. Because I know what the media will do. I know what our coaches would do." So I said, "You can't tell the football coach. If you tell your wife, you're going to have to swear her to secrecy." I said, "But we got to keep this to ourselves. And then if we decide to do it, we just need to call a press conference and announce it. No, there's going to be no debate. There's not going to be any kind of, well, we're thinking about this. It's going to be the decision's made." So a week later, he called me over to his office and he said, "Let's do it." And I said, "Well, this is awesome. This is great." So we went to AstroTurf. We were still talking to them. We decided we thought we wanted to go with AstroTurf because it was a proven product. And I said, "Look, we're interested in doing the turf in blue." And they got pretty taken back by that idea. But I said, "Can you do blue?" And we need to check with our engineers and see. But turns out, they had to put the color in green in that nylon, so they could put the color, they could make it blue. And so they first came back and they said, "Yeah, we can do it in blue, but we don't recommend it." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because we've never done it before. And, so we don't have any guarantees of what it's going to look like or how it's going to weather." And, that was a concern because even the green fields, they would fade
right.
after a number of years. And they said, we at least know how the green fades. We don't know how the blue is going to fade, and we don't want you to have a problem. And then, so they go, we really think you ought to forget about this idea. And I said, well, there's some other companies out there. If you guys don't want to do it, we'll talk to them. And they go, well, we didn't say no, but give us a chance. So I didn't know about thought about the color spectrum. If you go to a paint store, they've got a fan of all the colors and all the different colors starting from dark to light. And I think I went to Home Depot and went to the paint department and said, can I see your color chart? And they showed it to me. Well, it turns out that the green and the blue were right next to each other. And so it wasn't like one was here and one was there. They were right next to each other. And so in my own mind, and this could be totally wrong, but I said, well, it can't be that much difference as far as fading with the sunlight. And so I went back to AstroTurf. I said, I think we really want to do this. We would want to go with the blue. And I said, but our colors are royal blue, the reflex blue, but it's closer to royal blue than navy. It's certainly not navy blue. And I said, so it's got to be, I'd like to see what color blue it is. Well, they couldn't tell me that. They said, we haven't done it. We don't know exactly what blue it is. So then I went back to the paint store and I started looking at all the blues. Well, there's 200 shades of blue out there and 180 of them are ugly. And so I go, this isn't good. I said, it's got to be the right color blue or I'm going to be in big trouble. So they said, well, this is what we think it's going to look like. They used to make, at the time they were making doormats, little doormats, and they made them in different colors. They had them in brown and they had one in blue and green. And they said, it might look like this, but it's not the same, but it might look like this doormat. And that's about as definitive as they could get. So I was nervous about what color blue it was going to be. So we announced this. The president, he called a press conference and we just said, hey, we're replacing the turf in the stadium. And everybody said, yeah, we know that. Said, but it's going to be blue. And, that was a shock, obviously. And and this was in the springtime and the field wasn't going to be put in until July.
Right.
So the media went kind of berserk. There was a lot of jokes. There were a lot of ridicule comments saying this is ridiculous. This is a gimmick. What's Boise State thinking? But they hadn't seen it. Nobody had seen it. So it was just all conjecture at that point. But they played it up for a couple of weeks and made a big deal about it. So then we had kind of a quiet period before the turf was actually installed, and it was going to be in early July when right before practice started in August. And I didn't say anything. I didn't tell the media, hey, they're going to install the turf today or anything like that. But it was right around the 4th of July. And I remember this vividly because that's a quiet period around an athletic department. Everybody's kind of gone for the summer and they're catching their breath before they got to come back and commit 100% to their job. So it was a quiet time. Nobody was around. Here in Boise, it was 105 degrees in July. And here they are, AstroTurf shows up and they're going to unroll the first 5 yards of the turf. And like I said, we didn't tell the media. I wanted to see it and get it going. And so I went up in the top deck of the football stadium. It was about 2 or 3 in the afternoon and it's like 105 degrees. And I'm sitting there sweating and I'm just going, please let this be the right color blue when they roll out this first 5 yards. And I'm up there by myself and I'm like, please God, please let this work or else I'm going to have a short career in athletics. And so they rolled out the first 5 yards of the turf. And I took a big sigh of relief because it was a nice color blue. I mean, it was good. It was good. So they installed the turf during July. It started to get a lot of, we were trying to publicize it because we were proud of it. At least I was. And
Right.
the coaches, we didn't tell the football coach before we made this announcement,
Wow.
and because we knew what the reaction would be. But and it turns out, I mean, he was judicious. The athletic director and the president made this decision, so he's got to be careful not to criticize our decision too much as the football coach. So he was quiet about it, and but it turns out, I found out later, he wasn't excited about the idea. But as the fall came on and we started playing, and then the coaches started recruiting, and by this time now there was publicity around the country, and it was getting some notoriety. They went from being skeptics and not in favor of it to coming back saying, this is great, because every house that we go into to see a recruit, they know who we are. They know, oh, Boise State, you guys have the blue field. And so it became a recruiting advantage for our coaches. So they turned quickly in favor of it. And obviously at the time, our football team, started to play very, very well. They were playing well consistently, but as we moved up from 1AA to 1A, when we were 1AA, it was still under the radar. I mean, people knew that we had put in a blue field, but it wasn't nationally recognized because we weren't on national TV. But when we moved up to Division 1A and started playing there, and we were willing to play on Thursday nights, which a lot of schools weren't, and ESPN started to open up that window, they started televising our games. Well, at the time, our offense was scoring 40, 50 points a game. We were winning, 8 out of 10 of our games. And we kind of became a darling of ESPN because they liked it. The people liked watching games in the blue. We had a very exciting offense. We were winning games, and everybody was happy. So obviously the success of the football team, I think, had a lot to do with the success of the blue turf. Had we been losing a lot of games
Right.
on the blue turf, the media would have said that's the reason,
Right.
losing, and you need to get rid of that turf because it's a curse or it's bad. Well, they couldn't say that. And so fortunately, that's how the recognition grew, because we were on ESPN often, 3-4 times a year on a nationally televised game of the week, and the blue turf got recognized across the country. So we were fortunate.
You've talked a little bit about the coaches' reactions, the administration's reactions. What was the fans' reaction?
Well, I think it was more positive than the media kind of made it out to be. The media kind of wanted to say, this is not a good idea. We don't need to do this. Why be so different? And but I mean, the first game we ever played on the blue, we won 75-0. Okay, I mean, it was a blowout, and so people couldn't really complain a whole lot because it was one of the biggest wins Boise State ever had. And as the season rolled on, we started to win a lot more than we were losing. And on the blue, we were winning even more. And so as that started to occur, and then you talk to the players, I think there was, hey, this is ours. They took some ownership in the fact that this was unique, it was different, and you know what? We're pretty darn good, and we played pretty darn well on this turf. And so this is our home, and I think we created a real home field advantage with the blue turf. And, one example of that was, I don't know how many years later it was, but we played Oregon State and we were playing them in Boise. Well, about 2 or 3 weeks before they were to play, I think it was the first game of the season. But I heard that they spray painted their practice field, and they have artificial turf over in Oregon. They spray painted their practice field blue because they didn't want their players to be intimidated, and they wanted their players to be comfortable on blue turf. As soon as I heard that, I said, we got them. We got them, because they are worried about the color of our turf, not our football team. And sure enough, we ended up beating them that year on the blue. So, it accomplished what I had hoped it would by giving us a home field advantage. Quite frankly, I thought naively that everybody would start installing turf in their school colors.
Right.
Why not? And like a lot of other things, you just, hey, let's do it that way. So I expected teams to come up with colored turf, but that didn't happen. And that, while it surprised me, on the one hand, actually worked even more to our advantage, because it got to a point where that was ours, right, and nobody else's. And I think some schools may have thought about going to, but then they didn't want to be a copycat.
Right.
And they didn't want to be, oh, we're doing this because Boise State did it. So, and then years later, when the university had their own attorney, we copyrighted the blue turf.
Is the family legend of sorts true that you went home and you turned down the coloration on your TV, that there was a football game on from green until it went to blue, and said that doesn't look so bad?
Oh, yeah, it wasn't football though. This was a springtime, and the only thing that came on in the spring was baseball. Well, I think it was the Cincinnati Reds, because they had an AstroTurf field, and there was a game on. Back then, the big TVs used to be a big box, and the color, you could go up there and adjust the color. And so I was sitting there with my kids one afternoon watching the Cincinnati Reds, and I go, well, they got a green, I can see the green outfield there, and they got a green infield. And I said, I wonder what this will be. So I went up and I turned the dial, and I was able to turn that green turf into blue just perfectly on the TV set. And we thought it was great. We said, that looks awesome. And so that helped. That gave me a little peace of mind, because like I said, we hadn't seen 100 yards of it before, and we didn't know exactly what color blue it was going to be. But watching that baseball game and even being able to do that gave me a little comfort that we were heading in the right direction.
Well, talking about heading in the right direction, from then, Boise State, they install the blue in 1986. 1994, they go to the national championship. The FCS ended up losing to Yorktown State, but they end up going to the national championship in the FCS. In 1996, so just 10 years after the installation of the blue, Boise State makes the jump from FCS to FBS, something you've already referenced so far in the discussion. What was that process like? Just kind of the mindset behind that, and okay, we're ready to make this jump now, and what was surrounding the program as you made that jump from the Big Sky to the Big West and on to the FBS?
Well, I think every school is always looking to try to get better and to try to increase their fan base and get more recognition and make it easier to recruit, because you got to be able to recruit to get the players. And so because of the success that Boise State had from day one, going back to their junior college days with Lyle Smith, who was an unbelievable football coach and won 80% of his games, there was that winning tradition. And the one thing that, when you mentioned Boise State, to other people in athletic knowledge that had athletic knowledge. I mean, they didn't know a lot about Boise State, but they know that that was a solid program, not just solid, but a winning program, and that you could win in Boise, even though Boise was relatively unknown on the map because we were 1AA, and you don't get the television time, you don't get the publicity, but they knew that you could win. So we were, at least since I got there, always looking at the possibility of moving up to 1A. And but you want to be careful with that, because if you're winning a lot where you are, that's a good thing. No matter what level you're at, people want to win. And nobody likes to lose. Coaches don't like to lose. Players don't like to lose. Fans don't like to lose. So you want to win wherever you are, and you don't want, as you know, if you are winning, you want to enjoy that and not put yourself at a disadvantage by overreaching and going beyond your means. And so, that was a concern of everybody. It was a concern of the coaches. It was a concern of mine. I think it was a concern of the university administration, and just everybody, that, okay, we're doing well where we are. Do we want to step up and say, okay, why do you want to do that? Is it just to say that now you're 1A? But if you start losing and get your brains beat out, nobody's going to care, and it's not going to be fun, and you're going to lose a lot of your fan base. So that was, always a debate. Then there was the politics in the state, which was huge at the time, because there was Idaho State, and Boise State, and we were in the same conference, and we competed against each other each year. And we had the fan base, we had the support to move up to 1A. And because of their population bases and the support that those programs, they weren't in that position, and still aren't in that position. But we felt like, even though it was a risk, that we could do that. So when we started discussing that possibility, the opposition came out. Oh no, you can't break up the Idaho schools. And the politics became very, very heated and very concerning, and caused problems for our decision to do that. And that was hard. That was really hard. It was hard on our university administration, and it was hard on our boosters, just trying to make that happen. And there was, the Idaho fan base and the Idaho State fan base, they wanted nothing to do with that, and they wanted to keep us back and hold us. So that was a real fight, and it wasn't easy. And so, but as the time went on, we felt like we had an opportunity to move up. Then it was really just the Big West conference that was regionally one that made sense for us and wasn't too big of a jump, because we were playing some of those schools anyway in our non-conference schedule. Cal State Fullerton, Long Beach State, University of Pacific, and those were teams that were 1A. They were in the Big West, and yet we were playing them and having success against them. So we said, we could make this jump. We could get to 1A, but we could also be where we could still win. And that was important. And so finally, after a long time of working it, we were able to join the Big West. But it was a fight, because we were now separating ourselves from Idaho and Idaho State, and that was not popular around the state. So we got into the Big West, And at the time, not all of their schools were playing football. Actually, only half of their schools played football, and the other half played basketball. And so when we joined the Big West, we had like I think a 12-team conference in basketball, but we only had, I think, a 6-team conference in football. So, but it was one step, and it was the first step, and it was a step we could make and still have success. And that was important. And as it turned out, that worked well for us, because then the next step was the WAC and the Western Athletic Conference. And again, that was some schools that we had played with. Nevada, Reno, they were in the Big Sky for a number of years. They moved up. They moved up before we did. And now they were I think they went to the Big West, and then they went to the WAC also. And so once we were 1A, that was the big step politically, in the state. And once we had that separation, going from the Big West to the WAC to the Mountain West, while those were big steps, they weren't politically as challenging as the other. And those kind of just evolved around us. We weren't the impetus for those invites, but it was the schools that we had played with for years, fortunately. And again, we were competing well with those schools. So it's not like we were jumping into the Pac-10 conference or the Pac-12 conference from the Big West or the WAC.
Right.
And then when the Mountain West formed, that was really an ideal conference for us. And it challenged us, it moved us up, gave us more national recognition, and yet we were able to compete and stay viable. And at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants to do. They want you to win. And
right.
I think schools would rather win at a lower level than lose at a higher level. And what North Dakota State has done in 1AA is phenomenal. And what a legacy they've had for being king of the mountain. And so it's hard to criticize that. But our community was growing, our fan base was growing, and we saw the opportunity to grow along with that, and I think kind of help that happen. And then, of course, with the national television opportunities that we garnered with ESPN, it made Boise State a nationally recognized program, and you really can't do that at the 1AA level. I mean, as successful as North Dakota State's been, they still don't get the publicity that we get on a nationally televised Thursday night football game. When you get that kind of audience. So fortunately, those moves worked out for Boise State, and the landscape continues to change remarkably. I guess the only constant is change. When I look at my alma mater, UCLA, and USC going to the Big Ten, it's really mind-boggling.
Well, part of putting yourself in the right opportunity for each level, from FCF to FBS, and then moving up through conferences from the WAC to the Mountain West and then beyond, is having a successful program. And you were a big part of that, not just through the blue turf, but also as the athletic director, bringing coaches into the program throughout your time at Boise State's FBS level. You guys had Pokey Allen, 93 to 96, Houston Nutt for a short time before he went to Arkansas, Dirk Cutter, who of course was a big part of this last season, taking over the realms and doing a great job. Taking over the reins this last season, doing a great job. He was 98 to 2000 before he moved on to Arizona State. And then Dan Hawkins, who was part of Boise State's maybe their biggest initial rise there in their early days, taking over the WAC, beating Fresno State from 2001 to 2005 before he moved on to Colorado. And Chris Peterson, who I think is probably the most notable and famous coach in all of Boise State's history, at least to the present day, 2006 to 2013, moving on to Washington after a time there at Boise State. All these coaches had incredible success, especially Cutter, Hawkins, and Peterson. 72% winning record with Cutter, 82% winning record with Hawkins, and an 88% winning record there with Peterson. Talk a little bit about, you don't have to go through every single person, how every single hire happened, but just how some of these things came about, how some of these things happened, and what you were looking for in each of these people as far as what they brought to the program and their character when you made these decisions to say, hey, take over the reins of Boise State. Let's see what you can do.
Well, first hiring coaches is always a gamble, and you're always rolling the dice, even if you think you've got a slam dunk. You never really know when you take, especially an assistant coach, and make them a head coach. But that's the world that we lived in, and so those decisions had to be made. The great thing about those people that you mentioned were that they were excellent football coaches, but they were good people. They were good recruiters, and they believed in Boise State, and they believed in the tradition of Boise State, and they knew Boise State was a place where you could win, and that's what attracted them to our program. And that belief in just, hey, you can win at this school. I can't overemphasize how important that is, especially when you try to hire a coach. But then when that coach tries to instill those values into their team, that belief that you're going to be successful, that can go a long, long way in helping the program succeed. And so, Pokey Allen came in here, did a wonderful job. He was a character. He was, the fans loved him. He was funny. He was light, but he loved football. He was all about football. And then we brought in Houston Nutt, who was a tremendous football coach. And, he was from the South. He was different, in a lot of ways, but he made the players believe in what he was doing. And even though he was here a short time, he continued that excitement. And then we brought in Dirk Cutter at that point. And, Dirk had grown up in Pocatello. His dad was a football coach. I had interviewed Dirk a couple times before. And when we finally hired him that year, Houston Nutt had left unexpectedly in the middle of the night. I called Dirk and I said, Dirk, we're not going to do a search. We're not going to do, the job is yours if you want. He said, well, good, because I'm not interviewing there again. He had interviewed a couple times. And I said, you don't have to interview. We've done that, but want you to be the coach. So the day that it was announced, that we announced that Houston was leaving, was also the day that we announced that Dirk Cutter was hired as head football coach. So we made that as seamless as possible. And when it comes to recruiting, that's early December. That's really important. So Dirk came in here and just established a wonderful mentality, a wonderful foundation for the program. And he believed in what we could do here, and did a great job. And then he had brought Dan Hawkins over from Willamette as an assistant coach, so he was on our staff. And fortunately, when Dirk left, we were able to just promote Hawk, and that was seamless. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But in our case, it worked. And then when Hawk left, we were able to promote Coach Pete, and then he came and took it to a whole another level. So we were very fortunate to have great coaches available, but the reason they were available and interested was because Boise State had a tradition that Lyle Smith established, that you can win at Boise State. And one thing about a coach, whether, I don't care if they're coaching Pee Wee football or Pop Warner football, or if they're in the NFL, they want to win, and they want to be at a place where they can win. because it's no fun if you don't. And so that, I think that attracted all of those individuals. And we had great people working at the university. We had a great community, have a great community that supports the football program. And the coaches were able to come in and take advantage of that.
Now, I know that you said Boise State's got a tradition of winning history, and that's absolutely true. But were you surprised at all by the trajectory of success that the university enjoyed, especially in those 2000 era where they joined the WAC and then they go on to win or co-win the championship every single year except for 2007? And of course, the Fiesta Bowl happens. Boise State goes and beats Oklahoma, which I don't know if anybody saw coming. Maybe you did, but were you surprised by the just? It wasn't just kind of like this. I mean, it was a rocket ship there in the early mid 2000s, even through into the late 2000s. Were you surprised at all by the trajectory of success at Boise State?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it was what we had hoped for, and it was what we thought we had the potential to be successful, but nobody projected that it would go so quickly and so high. And I told people as we were going through that, and I told my wife often, but I'd come home after a game, we'd go on the road and we'd play somewhere and we'd win 55-0, and the game was over at halftime. And everything was great, everybody's happy, slapping people on the back. And I said, this is la la land. This is not really college football, how it normally is. This is not reality. We're experiencing something here that is very unusual, and we need to appreciate it, because this is not how the world functions. It's not how all the other athletic directors in our conference get to spend their weekends.
Well, talking about not knowing how long it would last, it just seemed to keep going and going. You got, like I said, through those early years of the WAC, Boise State knocks off Fresno State in that season where they were hoping to maybe go do what Boise State ended up doing later on. They have a great season. Boise State beats them, and then they go undefeated in the conference, and it's just this amazing rise. And then, Dan Hawkins leaves, and I think that was a shock for a lot of people. I mean, maybe the athletic administration saw it coming, but okay, now it's the next man up. And Chris Peterson, you got this young, exciting, offensive coordinator who's never been a head coach anywhere before, taking over the reins as a young guy for Boise State. Maybe not as young as you were when you were the athletic director of Boise State initially, but a young guy taking over the reins of a very successful program. Just being honest, what were the expectations there? Of course, you guys expected Boise State to continue to succeed, as they always did, but I'm sure you didn't see him going that first year to undefeated and winning the Fiesta Bowl. What were the expectations there, and how did the mindset change as the season went on?
Well, you have to be realistic, and we got a new coach. First time he's been a head coach. He's going to come in here. Obviously, we're not going to win every game. Okay, there's going to be some hiccups there. There's going to be a learning curve. We got to be patient. Every time I've ever hired a coach in any sport, you got to be patient, because they're coming into a new situation, a new culture. They're stepping into a new role, and to expect that a coach is going to win the conference or reach the heights that we reached that year is ridiculous. I mean, it's unrealistic, and I certainly didn't have those expectations. I knew we had a decent team, and I felt really good about Coach Pete because I knew him as an individual, and that's one of the benefits that we had, because a lot of times when an athletic director hires a football coach, which is probably it's the most visible hire you're ever going to make, a lot of times you have to make that decision in about 4 or 5 days from the last game of the football season to within a week, because you want to get recruiting, and you're talking about late November, and if you don't have a coach on board within a week, then everybody starts panicking. Oh my gosh, we're not going to be able to sign any recruits. We're going to be terrible for the next 3 years. The world's coming to an end. And that the media would just feed off of that. So here you got to make the most important hire in your program, and you have to do it in a 5-day period. So that's that's hard to do. And when you think about that, what happens is by the time you narrow it down and you talk to some prospective coaches on the phone, and then you decide to interview two or three of them, by the time you make an offer, you may have spent 2.5 hours talking to that individual. And after 2.5 hours, when they're on their best behavior and they're, in the best light they can ever be in, you're going to make that decision that you're going to have to live with for 4 or 5 years. So it's a tough situation for athletic directors to be in. And but fortunately, we were able to. We had known about Dirk Cutter. I had interviewed him twice before, so I'd gotten to know him and follow his career. And then and Pokey, I saw Pokey's interview was when he was at Portland State, and they came over and played Boise State on the blue and kicked the living daylights out of us. Okay, as a 1AA, he was 1AA or Division II, and they came over here and they put on a clinic. I think they scored 52 points against us, and it was the most lopsided loss that I think we had in a couple decades. But it was also one of the most impressive offensive performances I'd ever seen. Well, that was, as it turned out, that was his interview. We didn't hire him until the end of the season, but talking to him for an hour and interviewing him for an hour, I knew a lot more about him watching his team play back in September when they came over to our place and just, like I said, beat the living daylights out of us. So we had that opportunity, and then we with Dirk Cutter, and then Hawk was on our staff, and then Coach Pete was on our staff. So I wasn't hiring somebody that I had only got to talk to for 2 hours or 2.5 hours. I was hiring people that I had lived with and associated with, and I knew their families, and I knew who they were, and knew a lot more about them than you normally would. So that was a real benefit for us.
Well, you talk about some of those under the radar hires that happen. And one of those other sports that for Boise State has been an under the radar program has been basketball. And that's really unfair to Boise State because they've been so successful, especially after you brought on current head coach Leon Rice in 2010. Going back to 1970, Boise State only had 7 wins where they had 20 or more wins in their season. Well, between 2010 and 2023, 10 out of the 14 seasons that Leon Rice has been coaching, Boise State has won 20 or more games, and they've been to the NCAA tournament 4 times. Haven't been able to quite get over the hump of winning that game, but you feel like it's getting closer and closer each time. And the fact is that Leon Rice is putting us in spots to get there, and Boise State is earning the title as being more than just a one-sport school. They are showing themselves that they can compete in their conference in both football and in basketball. Talk a little bit. You've talked about these great coaching hires and what they did for the program. Talk a little bit, I know it's towards the end of your tenure there at Boise State, but talk a little bit about Leon Rice and how he came to be a part of this program and what you've seen out of him.
Well, Leon's done a fantastic job. And going back before him, basketball, when I got here, we were playing in the old gymnasium, which I think seats about 3,000 people. And it's a glorified high school gym at most. And that's where we played our games. Well, we were never going to elevate the program with that kind of a facility. You're just not going to be able to recruit the kind of players that you need. So fortunately, actually, before I got here in 1980, they had broken ground on the pavilion, which is obviously the 12,000 seat arena that they still play in today. That was a game changer for Boise State. That was a statement by the university saying, hey, we want to play at the highest level, and we're willing to build the kind of facility that we need to do that, and we need to be able to recruit. And so we opened the pavilion in 1982 and seats 12,000 people. And now we were on par with the nicest facilities in the country. Now we needed to to improve the team, start to recruit the players. Well, one of the things that I could do, you hire the best coach you can. We hired Bobby Dye early on, and Coach Dye did a phenomenal job, and he changed the basketball culture here. And we got it to where we were getting 10, 11, 12,000 people in that facility, which was just phenomenal. And so Bobby really started that, and having that facility. And one thing we could do, try to get more publicity and visibility, is we would try to bring the first and second rounds of the NCAA tournament to the pavilion, to Boise. And we worked very hard doing that. I think the first time we did it was in 1983, and we kept after it. Then we did it in 1989, and then we got on a 3-year rotation. So we did it in 89, 92, 95, 98. And there were some great games in the arena. And that gave Boise State that visibility on the basketball side that we were getting with the blue turf. And then Coach Dye, just did a phenomenal job. As good as Leon is, Bobby Dye was that good too. And that really has helped elevate the basketball program. And, it takes time when you're not a blue blood in that sport. It takes time. And now that the fact that Boise State has been able to get an at-large bid, in the day, when I was here, if you didn't win the conference tournament, you weren't in. There was no way you were getting an at-large. And it takes time to build that credibility and that respect around the country. And it took years and years, but now we're to that point where Boise State, as they did this year, can get an at-large bid, and that's huge. When we hired Leon, he was at Gonzaga, and he was an assistant to Mark Few, and that's probably the greatest program in the country when you look at what they've been able to do up in Spokane, in a small school, in a relatively small conference, to be able to become a national power. They, in a lot of ways, what they did in basketball is what we did in football, okay, and took that to the highest level. And I've always admired Mark Few and Gonzaga for what they were able to do. And so when we went looking for a coach, and we realized Leon was interested, I mean, what better program could you hire an assistant from than Gonzaga? And I knew Mark Few a little bit. He's married to the sister of Christina Van Tol, who was my associate athletic director here at Boise State. And so I knew they're good people, and I knew their roots enough to know that they're as solid as you're going to find in the coaching profession. And so having Leon in that program and learning from Mark Few, you couldn't get a better opportunity. And so we brought Leon in here, and the rest is history. He's just done a phenomenal job, and I'm so excited for him and glad that he's still here. Glad for him and his family, and glad for Boise State.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about, you said the rest is history, and that's, you've been building Boise State's history from day one when you got here. So thank you so much for coming on and talking about that history and talking about the founding of the Blue and beyond and what it did for Boise State. This was a great discussion. Your answers were very, very in-depth. We really appreciate you coming on and having that discussion with me today. Just kind of summarizing here, looking back, obviously the Blue is huge. Bringing on Chris Peterson is huge. The Fiesta Bowl wins, the jump to FBS, the days of Bobby Dye in the pavilion. When you kind of summarize all of that together, is there any kind of final thoughts you have on the time that you had at Boise State and were able to experience what it brought to your life and what you were able to contribute to the programs?
Well, absolutely. First and foremost, if you don't have support from the top, from the president of the university and from the community, you got no chance. And the presidents that have been here have been tremendous and very supportive of athletics. And so has the community. and the boosters and the donors. And you can't build a program without everybody chipping in and really coming to the forefront. And none of those coaches could have been successful without the president's support. And none of this would have happened if the community didn't step up. So it took everybody pulling together, pulling in the same direction to build a successful athletic program like we have at Boise State. So it starts with the president, it starts with the community, and it starts with the coaches, and then it comes down to the student athletes doing their job. We've been very fortunate in all of those categories here, and hopefully that'll continue.
Well, you deservedly brought into the Boise State Hall of Fame here recently, this last season, finally being able to be part of that class as it was late due to COVID, and for good reasons. And so I thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today about the blue and about the legacy and about how all of this happened and how we got to where we are today. I thought this was a very, very insightful video and a great discussion of the past. We look forward to the future and what this next season and beyond has to hold for our programs, and not just football, but basketball and all of their amazing athletic programs across the board. So thank you so much for coming on and joining me. And thank you, everybody, for listening all the way through here as part of this great discussion. So thank you, everybody, for listening to us today. Thank you so much, Uncle Gene, for coming on and being part of this program, and not just Boise State, but being part of my channel here today and getting to discuss the history there of Boise State. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
Well, thanks, everybody, for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, and as I end every single video, and especially heartfelt and meaningful today, go Big Blue!
Absolutely.